I would assume that one of the obvious things that really every responsible adult ought to be able to do would be make sure they know CPR, make sure that they can save a life on their own, because quite often it may be too late to wait for somebody else to arrive when you're there.
Yep.
And so what would be the fastest, most simplest way for people to make sure they know at least CPR?
Going through your American Red Cross, actually you can sign up for a Red Cross or a first aid or CPR class. And there's a number of different locations. Clark College, as well as the Northwest Regional Training Center, offers first aid and CPR, multiple times a month here in Clark County. There are even iPhone apps on first aid and applications that you can download that give you the instructions. And it's really important that folks know when a disaster strikes, we prioritize emergency response resources, and there's very few of them. People think about how many police cars and fire trucks there might be, and the prioritization for us as an emergency manager is how can we save the most lives with the resources we have. So to send resources to individual homes or individual property is not going to happen often during an emergency. So folks need to be prepared to be on their own, and on their own maybe for up to 10 days or 2 weeks. It's really important to consider, what would happen if they couldn't have access to emergency resources.
So if even people wanted to do the simple thing of just simply taking a CPR class, they can go to that very valuable website, click from there to Red Cross, and they will tell them how. And also, I know our business, we've actually have enough people here where we've had instructors come in, scheduled them, and we have maybe 1 or 2 days, half a days or a certain number of hours, where a group of our employees can come in and they can take the classes. So that's not something that you need to just simply fall into someone else's schedule, but you can actually bring them on, organize a group, whether it be an employee group or just friends and neighbors to your community, and make that happen at their convenience, at their time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Great. When it comes, you mentioned emergency supplies and for food and water. How do people find out about that? And what do you recommend, even if they don't go to the site? Could you just simply name some of the things that people can do in case something bad happens, they can't get food and water and whatever the emergency supplies are? What should they have in their home to be prepared?
Sure. Folks should have food and water in their home for about 3 days. The rule on water is 1 gallon of water per person per day. So if you're thinking about a 4-person family, that would be about, for 3 days, about 12 gallons of water. So, and that is for, food, hygiene, and drinking water. And for food, it's important to think about food that's non-perishable, things that you could eat without necessarily having power. So things like peanut butter, crackers, things that can be prepared without actually, having to rely on your stove or ways to cook.
If people need to leave their home in case there's an emergency, do you recommend to have actually a go kit that has whatever you need to be able to go on the fly?
Emergencies can happen when you're not at home. They can also happen when you're in your vehicle. We had a situation in La Center where we had a fire along the freeway on a 106-degree day a couple of summers ago, and people were stuck in their cars for 6-7 hours during that fire situation. The traffic backed up all along I-5. So it's important to carry bottles of water in your car, and even some, snacks and stuff in your vehicle in case you were to be stranded. Sometimes we get those freak snowstorms, and folks get stranded for longer periods of time, and it's important to be prepared, home, office, and your vehicle. And
you may just forget about what's in your trunk, but if you get stuck in one of those situations, then you think about it, and you think, well, I'm sure glad I got a blanket for each person, or I have water here or whatever that you need there. You might even need toilet paper or something. Just to be able to make sure that you are not putting yourself in a real difficult position.
And if you're prepared in your vehicle, you're prepared to help others even during a vehicular accident. I find that I access my kit for food, water, and blankets for folks when I come upon car collisions that occur. And people, go into shock and don't think about what's happening. But if you're on scene and have a bottle of water for them, you can likely save a life.
And that makes the preparation makes all the difference in the world. So you really recommend, to be responsible citizens. It's a really good idea for us to take the measures, to be prepared ahead of time, because we never know when that's going to be needed.
That is true.
Are there any other tips that you would think our community ought to hear from the emergency manager?
Well, I think it's really important that folks know how to text message. That is the one thing that is being seen in emergency after emergency, even in Haiti and Chile and Japan. And a lot of our community is not familiar with sending a text message, but sometimes in emergencies, the bandwidth for making a phone call goes away, but you're still able to send a text. And so it's really important to know how to do that and how to contact someone, a friend or family member in a different state. Because if the emergency happens here, we might be able to call someone in Montana, but we might not be able to call someone in Vancouver. So it's really important to have a person outside a state that your loved ones can call and say, hey, I'm okay, and coordinate that. They call that an out-of-area contact. So important.
So it sounds like that one of the natural responses of people may say, well, I don't text, I hardly have a cell phone, and they go through the things of just listing how they normally live. But it sounds to me like part of that being prepared is stretching yourself a little bit and getting more familiar with your sending a text. And just for the sake of being able to use it when you need it, start sending some texts.
Yeah.
Start emailing. Learn how to do that. Just, at least get a Twitter account, and once in a while just send something and list something. Maybe your friends or your family members, just because it becomes a tool that you're familiar with because you just don't know if you're going to need it.
Yeah. Better to know when it's not an emergency. Japan found out that 500,000 people signed up for Twitter accounts the day after the earthquake, and that's because it was the only way they could communicate.
And it would have been better the day before.
Before the earthquake,
yeah,
sure.
Or a month or a year before.
Yeah.
So not just to sign up, but to get familiar with it so that you're not trying to figure it out in a crisis.
Right.
I expect that when a crisis happens, your ability to think about more than one thing just pretty much gets down to like one or two things,
Yes.
and the best maybe three things, and you're just focusing. It's almost like you're nearsighted. That's all you can think about or see about is this one thing. So the automatic behavior happens when you've been prepared in your practice, and it's like, oh yeah, I already know how to do that. That kicks in.
Yeah. When you practice or you exercise certain things, it becomes like muscle memory, and your body automatically begins to go through those steps. If you're not in practice, you're much more liable to go into paralysis and not quite sure what to do. So practice, fire drills out of your home. Practice communicating with those that you would connect with during an emergency, because when you can't think and you're, dealing with a crisis, it just comes much more naturally.
When it comes to any other resource, like say a video that people could view, maybe online or something, are you pointing to those kind of resources on your website as well?
Yes, there's a number of great resources through the State Emergency Management Association, as well as like Centers for Disease Control, and FEMA puts out a fair amount as well. So oftentimes on our blog, we'll share different types of preparedness tips and ways to consider, ways to think about that people often don't.
What about ham radio operators? Do you work with ham radio operators?
We do. We have teams of ham radio operators here in Clark County, and actually in my Emergency Operations Center, a whole ham radio room where folks come in and communicate out with other ham radio operators throughout Clark County. They serve as weather spotters for us, so that when we're in a weather-related hazard event, they report in terms of where the river levels are at and what they're seeing out in the community, as well as identifying needs that they're seeing in terms of traffic congestion and other key issues that we need to respond to.
So if you're a ham radio operator, do you need to go, or should you go through some kind of a registration process so that CRESA knows that you are there and they can, you're enrolled in the system?
Yep, one of the volunteer groups, and I overlooked it earlier when I mentioned it on the website, is our Clark Amateur Radio Disaster Group, and they are also part of that emergency worker registration. So there's a link on our website. You can connect with the Clark County Amateur Radio Operators and get connected, and they serve with us as well.
That's very good. So those, I know ham radio operators, you can quite often tell where they are, where they live, because they got those antennas all over the place, or not, to varying degrees. So those neighbors that may be annoyed by that, one comforting fact in that is that they just might save your life, or they just might get that emergency communication in a time of a crisis. So those ham radio operators can be very valuable, very precious in a time of when communication drops out. Even if satellites or whatever drop out, and you got something, you got a solar storm or something, quite often, especially for a local area, that communication could be the backbone during such a crisis.
Yep. We rely on them heavily, and they come in and test their system every week with us and report to the state, so we know that those communication channels are open and working. So.
Very good.
Yeah.
Anything else that we ought to make people aware of?
No, just make sure that you think about preparedness today and not when the disaster strikes.
Okay. Are there any more conferences like this 140 conference coming up, or all those other social media conferences that people ought to be made aware of?
There probably are, but in terms of this conference, this was kind of a unique event for us.
It's like a one-time event.
Kind of yeah, there will be discussions about what happens in the future, but we've not sorted out whether or not we would do this again. So.
And how many people attended that event?
Well, we had 350 people that attended in person, and I'm still getting the numbers, but I was told today it was over 85,000 minutes that were watched online because it was live streamed out. And we're also posting all the YouTube videos, all the different presentations as we receive them. So we will
on the website?
On the 140 character website.
What 140 character website?
It's a separate website. It is attached right now to our CRESA website, but the conference website was nw.140conf.com.
We'll say that slower again.
NW, Northwest, nw.140conf.com. So that's the 140 character conference is an international conference, and they have it's part of their branding. So we have a Northwest version, kind of a website off of theirs to talk about the 140 conference. So
great.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to know that you are on the leading edge, and as you describe it, the bleeding edge.
Yes.
And that you are using whatever resources are making themselves available. This new technology, you're taking advantage of it, and the community can take advantage of it.
Yes.
That's very informative. I'm glad you're on the right path.
Good. We will do anything to communicate with the public, and it's important to us because we serve the public, and we can't do our jobs well if we're not in the areas in which the public is communicating.
Yes, and you're engaging the community. That's
yes.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for the insight to get all that up in place already. We are much more prepared than we ever were.
Yes.
So great. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
That pretty much wraps it up for Clark County Today. Thank you.